Oh, giddy up, boys and girls, because you're back on Concept Soup, where it's going to be a wild, wild, wild ride. Now, we had a really good response in terms of viewership, comments, engagement, all this kind of stuff on our last video about a budget case, which was the Aerocool Trinity Mini G V2, which was like a £30 case, which actually turned out to be, you know, it was cheap, but did the job fairly well. And I thought it might be a nice little follow-up to that to find another budget case in that sort of £30 to £40 range, to see if it's actually going to be any good, see what's available now, because that video is a little bit older now. So what case are you talking about, mate? Get on with it. I'm not here to listen to you babble on, all right? We're talking about the Oversteel Iridium case. Now, I've never heard of this brand, Oversteel. I'm not sure what countries, what territories it's available in. It's obviously available in the UK because that's where I'm at right now. But I thought it was intriguing. It looked like actually quite aesthetic case. It had a bit of RGB included. I thought, how bad can it be? Let's have a go. So of course we're going to put a build together in it, because what good is there having a look over a case if you're not actually going to put a build in and try it out? So we're going to be having a bit of that. We're going to have a little bit of gaming tests as well, a bit of temperature testing, and of course a tour of the case just to show you what's going on inside this case, because obviously this isn't going to be covered very much anywhere else, because I think it's a new kid on the block, it's very cheap. So let's have a look over the case, but stick around guys, because quick sponsor spot first. This video is brought to you in partnership with JCPC purveyors of fine gaming PCs. But why buy from JCPC Customs? There are three pillars to what we do: enthusiast grade build quality, stunning good looks that you are proud to display, and all at a fair price. But how do you get your hands on one? Well, we've got three methods. We have the ready to go PC section. These are PCs that are already built, ready to ship out with optimized specifications. So excellent for the most fuss-free experience. For those that want to spec out themselves, you can use our Configurator listing, and this is where you can choose some lists of parts that we have available to us. But for the most granular experience, the truly custom experience, you can use our custom spec service, and this is where you fill out our Google form. You can choose every component, even down to the model number, and any other accoutrements that you also want with the PC can be accommodated here. So thank you very much for watching, and head to jcpccustoms.com to learn more. Wait, don't go anywhere just yet. Quick one, I've got a discount code for you for jcpccustoms.com. Use code YTFREE at checkout. You get free shipping on anything on the website. That includes PCs, so that's like a £30 saving right there. Anyway, on with your regularly scheduled content. Well, thank you very much for watching the sponsor spot, or if you skipped ahead, that's also fine. I mean, I skip ads all the time as well. So we're going to be putting a build together in this PC using the RTX 3060 Ti alongside the Intel i5-12400F, which has actually turned out to be a really powerful combination. I think in terms of value for money, this is probably one of the best combos out there. 3060 Ti, fantastic performance, mid to high end spec. You've also got 12400F from Intel, which is giving you that Ryzen 5 5600X performance for a lot less money. So it's going to be a nice build. Putting that together, we'll go through obviously the build montage in a bit, but I think it's important that we actually have a look over the case to see what's going on inside. So let's do that now. So obviously it comes in a bog standard box. It comes with bog standard packing foam, pretty much what you'd expect from any case. And you know, squaring it up at the moment, I'm looking around this thing and I'm thinking, you know what, it's actually quite a nice looking case. Like, it's quite aesthetic, it's all pure white and everything, it's got tempered glass. I think there's got to be a catch here. I do see on the cable management side that it's got that cable management like bulge factor to it, which is not always a good sign in terms of the amount of room that you'll have for cable management. But hey, look, I'm in an optimistic mood. I'm looking forward to putting this one together. So let's pop off this tempered glass side panel and see the goodies within. Now that glass panel is very thin, but it is glass, which is definitely an upgrade over acrylic. So we've got an RGB fan in the back, which has some kind of proprietary connector that goes that also connects to something in the front as well. Not very impressed with the fact that you can't just use standard RGB. But, you know, on a cheap case like this, you know, it's to be expected. So let's pull off that cable management side panel and take a look with what we're working with over there. So as you can see, barely any room for anything. You can put in a 2.5-inch hard drive at the bottom if you wanted to. You just have to screw it in directly from underneath the case. You've obviously got the power supply cut out here. Now the good thing about this not having a hard drive cage is that you can put like a pretty beefy power supply in there if you wanted to. But you know, if you're going to be putting any other kind of power supply in there, having a hard drive down there as well, it could get a little bit cramped, but I don't think this is going to be too much of a concern. It's also got cutouts for 2.5-inch SSDs as well. It's going to get really tightly packed in there if you do try to use those. So I'd probably try and stick to M2 storage in this case, if possible. So let's turn our attention back to the pretty side of the case, the glass side of the case. We can see all the cables from the front panel just sort of strewn in the middle there, tied together. We're going to undo that proprietary connector on the RGB fan there and just try and organize this a little bit better, because, you know, with a non-premium case like this, they're not going to go to the same kind of effort to nicely route the cables for you in advance, so you do have to do a little bit of extra work. You also saw we also moved all the bag of screws off to the side there as well, that come included in the case. So we've got USB, we've got front panel, we've got HD audio as well. I think it's got USB 3 and USB 2. And you can actually feed it in all fairly nicely through the top hole there, so we'll just go ahead and do that. And we're already looking a little bit cleaner there. So we've got all these different sort of proprietary plugs, and they're not really long enough, which is really confusing. So all the different RGB elements, all the power button and all that kind of stuff just seems to be sort of not quite up to scratch, and to be honest, I'm not that surprised given this is such a cheap case. And actually, in the process of stuffing those cables in that hole in the top, I managed to pull out the hard drive LED, so I don't think it was glued in very well. But luckily, I actually hate the hard drive LED. I don't connect it because I think it's just really annoying having that hard drive LED flashing at you all the time. So I'm not going to consider it a big loss, but it does show that, you know, with these cheaper cases, you don't always get quite the build quality that you might like. Now that's tidied up, we can go over some more the sort of official specs of the case. So there is room for 3 fans on the front of the PC, but there's not really room for a 360mm radiator. Now you might be able to sort of, you know, rig it a little bit so that you've got a 360mm radiator but with just 2 fans on it. That might work. But I would consider this a case that if you're going to use a liquid cooler, it will have to be a 240mm. And then if you're using a liquid cooler in this case, it's going to significantly affect the type of video card that you can put in here. Because obviously that's going to take up a lot of the horizontal room in this case. And actually this case is pretty narrow case anyway. I mean, I'll put the dimensions up on the screen for you in a little text box just to show you, but there's not very much room in this case in terms of width. So if you're going to be putting a liquid cooler in here, you need to be really careful with which components that you choose to ensure they're actually going to fit inside. The case, in terms of motherboard support, can do ATX, MATX, and ITX, so pretty much all of them, right? So plenty of room to fit in your more budget MATX boards if you want, or a full-size ATX, that's also fine. The PCI covers at the back, they have one that you unscrew, but the rest are all just snappy snappies. So obviously you have to be quite strategic, make sure you unsnap or snap off the correct ones when you're going to put it in, otherwise you'd be left with a big ass hole. And that's pretty much all about the layout. Now, one really annoying thing about this case is that, you know, you'd love for this case to be a little bit taller and then let you put a 240mm liquid cooler in the top. But because of how close the top of the case is to the top of where the motherboard is, you're just not going to be getting a 240mm liquid cooler in here. At least mounted to the top, just not going to happen, I don't think. And also, you don't have a cutout in the top left of this case to run your CPU power cable through, which is just so annoying. It's so annoying. Why? I know, like, this is supposed to be a really budget case, but I would consider having a cutout for the CPU power cable kind of a prerequisite now, because it just looks so ugly having to drag a cable over the side of the motherboard. Or what we often do actually in this kind of case is, you know, route the cable through and then screw the motherboard down so that the cable is actually trapped behind the motherboard. But again, that's not ideal either. So a little bit disappointed in that respect. So my first impressions are it's quite a pretty case. It does look kind of flash. But it does have all the hallmarks of a cheap case. So, you know, you don't have very much room for putting your extra storage in. I mean, officially there is room for all these things, but they're going to significantly impact your ability to build in this thing, because there's not much cable management room either. So as soon as you're putting your SSDs in there, it's going to make it even harder to get those cables tied down. So might be a little bit more of a tough build, but in terms of like keeping your costs as low as possible, I mean, it is really hard to make a case, particularly today with all the shipping freight charges, to make a cheap case that's actually pretty good. So, you know, you can let them off for some of these minor things. But I think the most annoying and I just think dumb thing in this whole case is this front panel thing, man. So in the front panel, when you see the picture online, it looks like it's got really nice airflow. Because it looks like it's got these like little holes on the front. Well, I wouldn't say really nice, but it looks like it's got some airflow. Got holes in the front, it's going to allow some air through. Then when you actually get the case and look inside it, on the front panel, there's a big like black sheet of plastic on there. Now, I think this sheet is there to enhance the look of the RGB on the front of the case. So I think that's what it's for, to reflect the RGB off it. But it just completely blocks all of the airflow from the front of the case. So it just makes it virtually unusable. So I would suggest anyone that does pick up this case, big key point here, unscrew all of the screws on the front here and just take off this piece of black plastic and just chuck it in the bin. And you'll get much better cooling in this case. But that's really the major gripe with this case, this and not being able to route your CPU cable through. So how about we get on with a build? We'll show you the parts as well, you know, going to put the build together, and then we'll see the final result and we'll have a chat again. Okay, so build complete, and you can see it in all its glory here. And do you know what? I think it's quite a unique front panel design. I think it looks really cool. I think actually aesthetically, they've done really well on this case, Oversteel, right? They've kind of really hit the mark on what I'd expect aesthetically. They also do a black version of this case as well. But I think actually aesthetically, you know, from the outside, it looks pretty nice. I couldn't complain about that at all. But in terms of the build process, yeah, it wasn't probably the easiest build that I've ever done, but again, also not the hardest build I've ever done. I think probably the most annoying case to build in, the really small ITX ones, and actually the O11 Dynamic case, I don't really like building in this case, the O11 Dynamic, just because it's really hard to manage all the cables, because people want all the fancy extensions and stuff, and they've got loads of modular power cables and stuff. So that makes it a little bit of a ball ache. But in this case, I wouldn't call it a horrific build. I wouldn't call it a super easy one either. There's not very much like tie down points for all your cables. And again, it just keeps coming back to this thing with the CPU cable, man. Like you have to like tuck it behind the motherboard, or you have to lay it over the top, and it just doesn't look great. And if they just slightly rework the tooling on this case in order to let you have an actual cutout for the CPU power cable, that would have been, you know, solving one of my major gripes with this case. But it really is a bit of a stunner, especially when you change it to the white color setting and have the glass on. I think it does look like a really nice sort of classy build, and I think it, you know, it's respectable. It's respectable, but you know, looks is only one part of the equation. So let's have a look at a bit of temperature testing that we got on this system here, and we'll take it from there. So I think first up, let's have a look at some temperatures. So if you haven't seen the channel before, of course, we use a CPU temperature test and the video card temperature test at the same time, which gives it that sort of high heat inside the system to make sure everything's as toasty as possible. So with the CPU temperature test, we use Prime 95, which is one of these programs that places an unrealistic load on the machine. We run this for 30 minutes. We record the maximum temperature and then the equilibrium temperature, which is kind of a made-up temperature that we use, but it basically ignores the really big spikes and then tells you what the temperature's like, under a heavy sustained load. So maximum temperature 100 degrees on this system with an equilibrium of 94 degrees Celsius. That's toasty, baby. That is real toasty. Now, I know we were using the stock cooler on this, which will have a big bearing on the temperatures that you get. So, 194, not actually a huge way off from what you might get in a decently ventilated case, with the stock cooler. But I'm confident that if you were to put something like an Arctic Freezer 34 on here or a YTFREE V5, that you'd get significantly lower temperatures in this case, and it would be something that will be completely solving your problem here. But it does show that perhaps there's not the best airflow going through this case, and that is kind of reflected in the video card temperature test as well, because we're using the Gigabyte Gaming OC graphics card here, which actually got a pretty nice cooler on it. It's triple fan cooler, nice chunky heatsink on it. This should be doing okay when it comes to video card temperatures, but we were getting 78 degrees Celsius on this, which just goes to show that airflow is very important. It's not just important for the CPU, it's important for the video card as well. And having our GPU running at 78 degrees C is fine in general usage, but it will be louder. And of course, you're knocking on the door, but not quite getting there, of thermal throttling. So thermal throttling tends to happen, sort of mid-80s, maybe sort of 82 to 85 degrees when you start to see serious slowdowns on your graphics card because of temperatures. So, if you're in a really hot room and you're running this, you might start finding that your video card's performance is slightly lower than you would like. So that's another fact that goes against perhaps this case in terms of the airflow. But performance-wise, when we run things like Heaven Benchmark or Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we actually got comparable results to what we'd get from the system otherwise. So, for instance, in Heaven Benchmark, FPS average of 182, score of 4599, and then when we run the Shadow of the Tomb Raider built-in benchmark, 1080p highest preset, we're getting 152 frames per second. So actually, this performance that we're getting here is actually pretty similar to what you'd get even in a well-ventilated case. So at the end of the day, it's really more a question of noise and that kind of thing. But I would certainly, if I was going to put this build together again, I would ditch a stock cooler. I'll be putting in something like an Arctic Freezer 34 or a YTFREE V5, something like that would help bring those CPU temperatures down quite significantly. So that's the PC tested. We've had a look over the case, but what are our final closing thoughts about this? And basically, it's going to come down to, should you buy this case? Now, I'm somebody that really does value buying something quality up front, spending a little bit more money to have it last longer and actually be able to enjoy it more whilst you have it. So in my opinion, this isn't a case that I would use personally for my own PC, simply because it's not quite compatible enough. It's quite short, it's quite compact, not got enough room to fit all the things that I want inside it. The airflow isn't ideal either, so that's going to affect the temperatures, it's going to affect the noise, and I really don't like having a noisy PC system. So for me, I wouldn't take it personally, but that's not to say that it's not for somebody, okay? So when we think about cheap case, you're thinking about people that really do need to save money. There might be a kid that's getting a job in a Saturday, in a retail shop or whatever, trying to save up some pocket money over all these weeks and months, and they just don't have that ability to spend a little bit more on a case. And that's completely fine, and that's exactly who this kind of spec is at. So, if you're going to be putting together something like an entry-level rig up to a low mid-level rig, I think this case will actually be fine, providing you do things like taking off that horrible black plastic on the front. I think it's okay, but there are better options even around this price point, but you're just not going to get that white look. That's kind of the difference. So things like the MSI Mag Forge 100R or 100M, those are both pretty nice cases, and they've got mesh on the front, much better airflow, slightly better build quality as well. But really, in terms of getting something cheap and in a nice white, posh, like frosty kind of color, you're probably not going to beat this. So it's a bit of a... I'm not really sure about this one. I think I'm going to say I'm not going to recommend it. I think you should just save up a little bit more, or get something like the MSI Mag Forge for a few quid more. This case is really for those that are saying, listen, I've got super low budget, and the case just has to be white. I have no way of going around this. It has to be a pure white case. That's who this is for. For pretty much anyone else, I think there's some better options out there for you. So anyway, what did you think of the video? What did you think of the case? Chuck those comments down below, because the engagement helps the channel and I enjoy it. I like chatting to you guys. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Give me a kiss on the lips, baby, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.